if we want to go ahead and get the leaders of the world face to face, all right, you say, look, you don't get any coffee until you meet. That's it. You are cut off. No more coffee. I'm telling you right now, Air Force One.
Well, it's either that or sex. So, I mean, whichever one you want to hold over their heads first.
He's 82. Come on. I mean, what do you think he's more interested in at 82? Trust me, it's the coffee.
The Big Sell Illuminati, where some of the best in the business discuss what's worked, what's working, and what's failed in selling big sales. Our panel of experts includes Clarity Seeker, a black belt of brands, our snarky marketer, Monique de Maio. CEO to CEO selling is his game. Fortune 500 in his lane. The Lex Luthor of the close, Mark Kennedy. The effective executive, a force on the boards, a buyer on fire, Tiffany Olson. David versus Goliath selling, the prince of process, Sun Tzu of big sales strategy, Tom Searcy. And that's your panel. Now it's time to talk about big sales.
Welcome to the Big Sale Illuminati podcast. And we're so glad to have everybody with us, except for one. You know, every time we get together, we seem to talk, it seems like we're talking about some version of a bourbon trail or a rough night from after a golf or whatever. And there's one common theme typically, and that's Mark. Although I will say Tiffany's pulled her game up just a little bit from the last couple of sessions. I think actually, as a matter of fact, he may be traveling, and it really fits into today's conversation, which is about face-to-face sales calls. Mark still does a decent amount of face-to-face sales calls. I mean, to open this up, I guess I want to kind of just talk about something that came out of Sales Management Association in 2022. Statistics were ridiculous. Face-to-face sales, commercial business-to-business selling, in 2000, 78% of those were spent with face-to-face sales. Now we're down to 22%. 22% of sales are done and closed on a face-to-face basis, on business-to-business sales, big sale level. It's amazing. We went from almost everybody, you could only close a deal if you were in front of somebody. And now, 80% of the time, you don't need to be in front of somebody to close a deal. Or inside of that, you may need to be with them several times, but the overall sales expenditure and time spent on task out there drop through the floor. Now, the SMA comes up with a variety of reasons for that. COVID, I honestly thought it was a drop because of COVID. So when I did the research for today's show, I thought it was a COVID thing, right? So we were 70% before COVID and 30% after COVID. No, this started 2 decades ago that it started to drop, and it dropped every year all the way through COVID. And by COVID, it was already in the 20s. So the question is for today's conversation, is the face-to-face sales call done? I mean, is that just gone and we no longer have to worry about it? And I guess I was going to ask, why do we still have the 22%? I guess I would toss that to Tiffany.
I think, Tom, it's really about the evolution of sales and technology. Because think about before, used to be the traveling salesmen, and they would go door to door, home to home, Fuller brushes, Hoover vacuum cleaners. And, at that time, the only way that people could interact with the product was if somebody brought it to their home. Then Sears catalog, get to look at the product, and then you'd go in the store and you would order it. Now the internet. So I just think that sales has also evolved. But I think what we've really learned is that, one, large, complex, very expensive sales still require that face-to-face. However, salespeople have to learn new skills. IT, presentation on Zoom or Teams, how to sell in place. Tom, you wrote a great book about that during COVID. And learning now that selling is a real team sport more than ever. You have inside sales, marketing, all of those have evolved. And that's what's important to remember.
It's interesting. My dad was a traveling salesman back in the 80s and, up through 2010. And my brother and sister and I, alternating weeks, would go on the road with him. He got a territory, right? Old school, had a territory. He'd call, set appointments. He'd go into towns. He'd go pull up to phone booths where they had them. He'd make phone calls to see if he couldn't get more appointments while he was in the town. We'd go do his prep. But my whole point is that whole idea of territorial sales and that whole idea of getting in your car and going someplace, it's not just an opinion. Statistically, this is dropping. And the idea of the culture that you're describing right there, the culture of commercial sales communication dramatically shifted. Monique, you work with a lot of people that you're actually creating the opportunity to not have to see a face-to-face to make a buying decision. Can you talk a little bit about how you've kind of moved them along in changing their cultural thinking about face-to-face sales?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you what I think. If somebody asked me, which you just did, are face-to-face sales calls dead? I would say no, they're not dead, but they've completely shifted and evolved, as Tiffany said. Marketing's job has never been more important for the big salesperson prior to this engagement. So digital marketing is table stakes today. Digital marketing is table stakes for the simple reason that the brand, the company, and the product or solution or service needs to be in the consideration set before the salesperson sets up any sort of meeting, face-to-face or non-face-to-face. That air cover has to be provided to that salesperson prior to anything, because you do not want your consideration to be established, whether it's on Zoom or not. You need that credibility out of the gate. You want to be invited into the room, whether that's a digital virtual room or a real room. So that's the first thing I'd say about marketing and providing that air cover.
I think about, here we are, we're on Zooms or Teams or whatever. We're having this conversation right now. I think about, because I talked to Mark, because all teasing aside, he's out right now closing a deal. And he knew what we were going to be talking about today. By the way, he says hi. And he said that I open the best doors face-to-face at the C-level, and I close the deals best at the end face-to-face. And he says, everything else, and when I say face-to-face, I should have said it. Face-to-face, I mean, just in case anybody's curious about it, I'm talking on-site. So just, I call it face-to-face, but here we are, we're face-to-face. I mean on-site. He's on-site or in the same city at an event or a meal or whatever, but time with person at the beginning of the large complex sale and at the end. Everything else is done without that face-to-face, except if engineers get involved and they have to go someplace and do some sort of a quality session or whatever. But even those, we've got construction companies, engineering companies, those kinds of things. They work on a work table style interface like Zooms or Teams or whatever. They get a ton done. So the technology, to your point, Monique, makes a big difference. But do you guys think it's stabilized out? I mean, you're a buyer on fire. From the buyer's perspective, what are they thinking about these face-to-face sales calls and the need, or what's valuable to them?
So for us, face-to-face is still important, again, when it's complex, when it's large, when we need to actually see the equipment, touch the equipment, maybe that we're buying. But the rest of the things, like the commodity items or items that we're very, very familiar with, we really don't need to see that salesperson face-to-face. We will go to our shows. So we go to 2 large shows, and there we usually spend the entire time talking to vendors, customers, but that's really when our sourcing people will make sure that they've got some face-to-face time with customers. And if it's still not a complex sale, then we're usually meeting them in their booth. So maybe just an informal, hey, we're going to be on the show floor during these 2 hours. We're going to stop by your booth type thing, because we're comfortable with them. Now that gives a competitor a finite opportunity to be able to convince us to try something. And as a salesperson, the other issue is you just now have a very limited time to impress, connect, and convince. And so, Monique, to your point of that digital footprint and really the digital labeling that a company has incredibly important. But everything else we really do over Zoom, conference calls, taking out a lot of that face to face. And we find we're just as efficient, if not more.
Wow. So that we need to unpack that. I need help on this, Monique, because you and I may have exactly the same or exactly opposing views on this. I don't know. Trade shows. It's nowhere in what my thinking had been before we got started in today's conversation, but now you brought up like the third rail for me on the world. When you look at the travel and entertainment line, for the T&E on your budget for a year or whatever, sales comes in there and they're looking for 6, 7, 8 figures of money, and the reason is because they've got 2, 4, 6 shows to go to. You talk about shows like I would want to go to because I would want to have somebody like you to sell to. It's just they're so freaking hard to find. I've got a way. I promise I'm going to talk about it, but I want to let Monique go ahead and unleash.
So here's what I have to say about trade shows. Trade shows are a necessary evil, but they're becoming the evil that you have to be very prescriptive about which ones you pick. Because back in the day, you might have picked 10 for the year or 12 or 15. And now I see it with my clients. It's down to 6. It's down to 5. And which ones are we going to go to? And at what level are we going to spend when we get there? Are we going to take the big title sponsorship? Aha. Not as much anymore. And here's why. Because now we'll distinguish face-to-face with in-person. So let's just say the words in-person so we understand the distinction. The in-person sales trade show experience has shifted completely. I am seeing friends and clients reallocate their dollars from big, large sponsorships where they were like, hey, we own the show. Nobody cares. Nobody notices. You want to sponsor the lanyard? Really? Or you want to sponsor the book? Really? Who gives a shit? So they're spending their money much more prescriptively in doing micro events.
Doing what, Monique?
Micro events, smaller, intimate gatherings of key prospects in a place where you can connect face to face and build a relationship, build a connection, build that executive buyer, build that relationship. So then when you do go on Zoom, you've already talked about your family and your friends and your dogs and your pets and your kids and your aspirations and who you are and what you like to do on weekends. And you actually have that connection. That's how I see trade shows.
So for me, I really agree with the idea of the micro event. The trade shows are all about meetings, not about the trade show floor. So my goal is to get a prospect, sponsor them, encourage them, whatever, to get a keynote spot. So if I'm involved in that, my answer is I'll sponsor that prospect to have the keynote spot. And then it gives me an opportunity to talk to that prospect in a very specific way. I don't find buyers walk the floors they may hit the floor, they may walk the floor, there may be a couple of things of interest, but then they're gone. But they're still there for 2 or 3 days because they've got meetings set up with either their customers or their vendors or whatever. So I always say that the trade show floor is kind of like the thing that draws everybody in, but nobody cuts a deal on the floor. You don't make your money on the floor. You make your money off the floor. You create the interest on the floor. And so when we used to have budgets for people to go out to trade shows and et cetera, our answer was simple. You need to have 3 meetings set in advance for every day that you're going to be there. And then you can go. We all know trade show meetings cancel. I mean, if you've got 3 and you get 1 or 2 in the day, you're still fortunate. But how much would it have cost for you to have gone someplace else? But if you don't get a qualified meeting, you don't get on a plane. You don't go find a meeting at the trade show. Those things can happen, but those are more byproducts. Really getting the trade show is about maximizing the amount of travel dollars and potentially get face-to-face. So yeah, trade shows, I like your opinion. I think Tiffany feels similar. You just have to be careful. If you listen to your sales and marketing people, right, there is not enough money that can be spent on trade shows.
Well, here's the thing about that. I don't necessarily know that my clients are super excited about trade shows just because But what I have noticed is the metrics and the data and the funnels that we've created leading up to these events to make them seamless and to make them an actual conversion tool for some of them, right? So by the time you get to the trade show, you already know what we have to say or sell. By the time the prospect gets there, they already have some familiarity with the why, and they're more apt to have the conversation. And it becomes just meet me at the booth as opposed to let me hope I can grab somebody coming down the aisle, which was like, that's not happening anymore. It's much more, what's the shotgun approach versus, just.
Yeah, it is very much, you have to orchestrate the meetings, orchestrate who you want to talk to, who you want to see. And like you said, Monique, create that micro event where you have that chance to connect because everybody's there. A lot of people are still working from their homes, so it's very difficult to get an in-person meeting. I think it's the ideal way to be efficient.
It's interesting. I was just, I just came back like 6 hours ago, and I happened to be with the woman, the woman who actually helped me understand what she meant by micro event. And her company is a very successful digital e-commerce company that was acquired by a larger systems integrator, digital, whatever. Anyway, the point is they were very big on sponsorships, very big on big events, very big on trade shows. And she has found that converting her allocation of dollars to women events is interesting. It has yielded tremendous results. So these ideas of becoming part of a dinner, I'm going to have a dinner with you and 5 other women tonight and 5 other women tomorrow night and 5 other women, she says, has moved the needle for their business in the biggest way.
I believe it.
You keep coming back to this idea of carving out, niching out, micro eventing. And I just think that is so smart because by doing that, right, the trade show is really an event to bring people to you. It's not you to go find people. And then you're creating in advance or the people are creating in advance.
Right.
These moments that they want to go to.
Right. Well, so then it becomes back to these people attending, going to their bosses and saying, I not only want to go to the trade show, but I'm meeting with so-and-so, and then I'm meeting with so-and-so, and then I'm meeting with so-and-so. And now you have a compound interest effect because now effectively you have more or less what you would consider, let's say 20 or 25 quote unquote sales calls, combined into a couple of days in a more meaningful setting. So I think the thing that I wrote down for myself is to say is that the table stakes has to be established. And then you're doing the high touch connection. Connecting is the new, right? It's not about how many, beers can I have at the bar. It's an actual true in-person, human to human conversation that effectively lays the groundwork for that face-to-face, non-face-to-face follow-up sales process.
Okay, so you're talking about this idea of the in-person. Let me give you a couple stats. I want to hear Tiffany you respond to it. In the same 20-year window, the time I was talking about earlier, on the same study, the cost of an average single face-to-face in-person visit has doubled. Okay, not hard to believe. Guess what? How much it takes as far as face-to-face meetings? How many meetings does it take to close a deal? Tripled in the same period of time. So, okay, we'll take 2 times 3 means that in-person meetings, right? And what it takes to close a deal at this point is now what? 6 times more expensive than it was 2 decades ago. Real-time money. This is measured in current dollars. So when you look at that, if it's 6 times more expensive to do that, what kind of business changes if you're on a board or you're looking at that level of leadership, Tiffany? What kinds of changes does that cause you to have to make or consider?
I think a couple of things. So one is that whatever would make my people more efficient, and I'd like to talk, and I'm going to throw it out here and then we can dissect it, but really the inside salesperson is the inside salesperson. make people more effective, especially in today's environment. I mean, before I think it was you either started your career or ended your career in inside sales, not necessarily had a career so much in inside sales. I think that has definitely evolved. But I think that it enables really the buyer to do much more research on their own, just as Monique was saying prior to. I also think, the statistic of it takes more times to actually close the sale. I, I don't know if that's maybe because people work more in teams or decisions are done more in teams with consensus. Sometimes those teams are just out of control with the amount of people and trying to get people together, that is what is causing that increase. But you know, for me, it would be what makes my people more efficient? How can I, if it is a team sale, make sure that either you're selling into a committee? How do we really make sure that people know how to do that in an efficient manner?
I love that. So here's what I think the face-to-face in-person connection does for you. It helps you navigate the bull. You have 15 people to sell to. Who's got power? Who's got sign off? Who's got final say? What's the real dynamic inside that company? You're not going to get that on a Zoom with the 10 people on the call. You're going to get that face to face in person with the person that you are your executive buyer. They whisper to you like, John's a pain in the ass. He's going to talk a lot.
I totally agree with exactly what you're saying. The challenge is the mechanisms on the buyer side as much as it is on the selling side. We would love to. Here's the thing. You increase everything 6 times as far as the cost of it. 2 issues are going to drive in. One is you're going to have to increase the size of the actual buy to justify who we're selling to. So you talk to your salespeople and you say to them, look, I don't want you selling anything less than $100,000 because when we look at the cost of selling on cost of sales averaged out over what your conversion rate is, we can't afford it. Our cost of sale goes through the roof. So the second, so we're going to have to decrease that, and we're going to have to increase the number of people. I don't know if anybody's aware of the statistic, but when I was working on the most recent book, it's 7 to 9 people on the buyer's table for any deal, right? Over 100,000. It's north of 9 after you get to $250,000. So to your point, and one of you said IT, operations, finance, receptionist. I mean, it's crazy. They get everybody.
A lot of people can say no. A lot of people with an opinion, probably only one that can say yes.
Right. The CFO's got some juice, but you don't know how much. Could he be overridden? Could he be, that's the stuff that you need to dig for. And that's the stuff you get when you're in person.
And if you can't get in person, then you do the niche work, but you do the niche work like this. All right. So when you look at our processor system, it assumes that the ideal is to get them person to person. The second ideal is to get them in cluster so you can figure out how to break them off into individuals. So we have a cluster meeting. Let's make certain that we have cluster and meeting is the correct pronunciation. So we have a cluster meeting about God knows what, right? The overall program review, the features and the benefits. We want everybody to be a part of it, And then we pair off. Hey, Joe and Ann should have a sidebar to discuss that. Let's get that meeting set up, and Bill and whatever. And we pull apart that meeting, and we start to go ahead and peer-to-peer set up some of that niche conversations. And I've been fortunate, Tiffany and I have had a chance to work on a couple of deals. That was back when there was in person, but the approach is very similar. Get them all together, break them apart, get peer-to-peer. And then that's where you get a little bit more of the person to person. You just don't get as much, but the buyers, hell, you've seen the buying stuff. They're not in the same buildings either anymore.
Yeah, and then I think that's also the challenge when you have a lot of these companies that are going pure remote or hybrid. Most people don't have the ability or the interest to meet up with you, and they are likely to be in a secondary, tertiary market, which is like, hey, if you don't have that in-person meeting reason to go to pickup spot, you're not going to do it. So the trade show is the draw. That's the central location, the hub on the spoke or the spoke on the hub. I screw up every analogy. This is going to sound really stupid, but I actually read your book cover to cover on vacation. And I really,
Shut up. Which book was that?
He has so many.
Actually, I have more than one. Oh, look at that. The Secret to Big Sales.
Anyway, shameless plug for Tom Searcy and Kara James Moore's book. It's really, really good. The Secret to Big Sales. The freaking process is dissected and analyzed and substantiated and broken down in a way that you can totally digest and go, oh my God, I wish I had this so many years ago. The authority arc is brilliant, and it's timeless. All of this is timeless. So how you deliver this stuff has changed. Where you deliver this stuff might have changed. The fact that you should deliver this stuff has not changed.
Yes, I would totally agree on all counts.
I will take all shameless plugs. Thank you very much. It's your turn next time, Tiffany.
Well, next time we should be talking. Well, hopefully we'll be talking about Tiffany's podcast on my podcast. Ha ha.
We're definitely going to go ahead and talk about that. And we should cover a little bit. We should take one of these episodes, and I really want to talk about the changing role of women in selling big sales. And I think that role is fantastic. In the big sales that we're seeing but again, to your point, Monique, and you're very passionate about this issue, it's going to be very interesting to talk about what the numbers are saying. All right. And then the anecdotes, but the numbers are irrefutable about what's going on. And it's for women in big sales, it's amazing. So, but back, I think there's a couple of things we need to kind of land this with this idea of person to person connectivity. What are some ways, since 80% of selling is occurring in a Zoom environment or a phone call environment? I'm sorry, only we use phones. Everybody else uses Zooms and texts. We're replacing that idea of creating a connection from face-to-face, having a beer, eating a meal, sitting in someone's office. We're going to do it like this. No, we do it. But what we're replacing that. So face-to-face has a smaller part. What's the other 80%? How do we do it better?
To get the prospect through the purchase cycle, if you will.
Exactly.
So I think the thing that we have to do, as I said before, is definitely set up the table stakes for them so that they've got the air cover and they're already in the consideration pool. They're not having to fight their way into, but please consider me because I'm worthy. They are already worthy. And so that process has already happened behind the scenes. And that's why the buyer's journey, as you know, is all kaflooey. It's no longer linear. So you don't know where and how long your prospect has looked into you or your company. You just should assume that anything that is out there for consumption can be seen. So you have to be confident as a seller. You have to be confident that your company knows how to, posture that, present that to the world. And then the salesperson has to create their own ability to connect with that prospect one-to-one. And I like doing, familiarity calls that has the seller provide value. And you talk about this in the book. At that point, you shouldn't be talking about your company and your solution, your service. That should be a given, right? At this point, you're providing value to them as a professional. Do you know what I know about your sector? Let me share with you some observations that I've had about your product service solution. Let me share some observations that I've had from your competitors. I have an idea for you. Would you consider something like this? I think it might have competitive advantages, things that are going to provide value. And then, and then there's always the virtual cocktail, which is always fun.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Monique, I think what you're talking about is really that strong coordination between marketing and sales, especially for marketing to set that digital reputation up. And the other thing that I wanted to say is on your comment of make sure you've done your research, especially on your own company, because that buyer can really research, go on your annual reports if you're a public company, your websites, and they may know or find things. And if you don't research your own company and go on your own website, very few people really kind of do this. Go on your own website, do your own digging on what's out there. You can end up being surprised. So I think those things are extremely important to make sure that you do.
This is Mark's world. Mark's world is where you show up in the search, how you show up in the search, what's the response from the search at a very, he's Fortune 500 clients and et cetera, but it's granular. You can talk about, and pick somebody out there who's going through a pretty strong response, and he's aware of how that's showing up, how it's showing up with competitors. The research that his company does is and is paid well for, is really, really good. I like what you said about air cover, and I just want to unpack that. I want to reflect back what I think I heard you say. All right. You said about air cover for big sales. Number one, your company has to have a clear, understandable place and information to be accessed digitally. So just to what Tiffany said, that it's going to be accessed. And so when people look at you, you've got the air cover that says, hey, we look like this. Secondly, you've got the air cover of frequency out in the marketplace that says, hey, we're experts. We know what we're talking about, and we should be credentialized. And the third party air cover that I think I heard you say was that when people are out there speaking through the information that they talk to clients, they have a place to refer back to whatever it is in that, whether it's white papers or pieces of information or locations or whatever. Because we're having to do this all by Zoom, there has to be a place, because they're gonna shop. Tiffany said they're gonna shop your credibility online through the sales process. That's what I heard as far as part of air cover. What am I missing?
No, I think you got it.
I think that piece, that's a real gem for me out of today's discussion, is how much of what's happening in the commercial world of business to business, personal sales, or just sales in general, is really a lot more about the power of the buyer, their time, their access to information. When we show up, we get a micro moment of time up front to introduce ourselves and provide credibility. We launch the sales process, which for the most part is going to happen peer-to-peer, Zoom to Zoom, those kinds of things. A lot of it's going to happen. And then at the end, we're going to close it a lot more person to person. Managing this has got to be informational process to make it work for us to control it. And the crazy part in all of this that Monique talks about is we still have to hold on to the personal connection.
It's about managing that middle. What do you do in the middle? How do you do it? How often?
Do you have an example of anybody who's really, really good at this? Just as anybody, I know it's hard because business to business stuff, I can talk about, I would probably have to say XYZ company to do that, because I know a number of them, and obviously that's part of what our business is. But Monique, it's part of your business, and Tiffany, you experience on the recipient side of this. Anybody that you say, wow, they're able to really sell and close without having to be in person all the time, and they can still get us through a complex sale.
Well, I think that I'm sort of a poster child for that. Real quick, I would tell you that I have a couple of clients who have, I will call, taken me to their 4 different companies over the course of their career, because they know that in the past, I've delivered, I've made them look good, I've provided value, I've given them insights that they've used strategically in their careers to get promoted. I've provided coaching to them on the side, like this is how you might want to handle your boss. And these are the sound bites that you might want to leverage. And this is what you should know competitively. And this is what your competitors are doing. And insights that allow them to get outside their 4 walls is the value that an outside vendor or salesperson can provide. And that is inherently what I think a lot of newer salespeople are missing. They don't understand. They're very transactional and they're very in it for themselves. And if you don't pay it forward, it never comes back to you. This is not a one-off. And the thing is, the sales experience, I'm going to redefine sales calls to sales experiences, because it's a continuum. It is absolutely a continuum, and it is not within the context of a four-wall situation all the time, right? So if you provide that value ongoing, I have clients who literally went dormant for 5 years. This one. I've worked with her in 3 different companies, big Fortune 100 company, Fortune 500 companies. She went dark 5 years, did it. I still connected with her. Happy birthday. Thinking of you. I saw this article. I thought you would like it. When the first opportunity for her to hire an outside marketing agency came up, I got the call. But I didn't go from, oh, you're my bestest buddy, to dark. I always kept her in my line of sight. I kept her in my inner circle. And that's how things happen. So when you have the opportunity, you're given it. But if you forget to keep these relationships and these connections warm, they will die.
I really think that sales experience gem is great. I think that Tiffany's been good about talking about buying experiences. I think I asked her at one point, have you thrown anybody out of your office? She goes, I'm from Minnesota. We don't throw people out of our office, but we do gently direct them to the exit.
That's true.
Yeah. In a friendly way, we say, oh, you're the best. And
A very, very polite, friendly way.
I think we're going to talk about this idea of the sales experience a lot more in the future because the game has so much change. I mean, the numbers, 6 times the normal expense to go ahead and cost a sale. What does that mean? We know there's margin compression out there because it's so easy for people to compare different companies. So that the world is going to have for salespeople, has to get bigger, has to get more complex, and transactions are going to be the only way that you can make any money, and those will be done online. So professional selling, that game is very, very different. I think that will be good. Thank you so much for the shameless plug. I'm going to talk it forward. We're going to talk about it in one of our upcoming podcasts. Absolutely, the current role and future role of women in big sales. I'll just give you this category piece. Number 1, in the next 5 years, the number of senior executives who will be at the buyer's table in a C-suite level is going to triple. In the next 5 years, statistically, done the research, triple. All right. The number of people that are going to be at that significant level of sales positions is going to double. It's not going to triple. There's a gap there. And that gap for companies who don't recognize what the future is going to look like will be a problem because there is a difference in how people get advanced inside of companies and how people think and how they buy. I may not be on that episode. I am lacking some of the prerequisite qualifiers, like I'm not a woman. The person who runs the company is, though. We may have her kind of guest star on that one. We'll see. But anyway, until next time we talk, the best wishes and best luck on everybody's big sales. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Big Sell Illuminati podcast. If you like this episode, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Until our next episode, best wishes on your big sales.